Henry said I saw it because I was looking for it. Like when you learn a new word and suddenly you hear it everywhere. If I had agreed with him, perhaps I wouldn't have called the number. Perhaps I would have brushed it all off and gone about my life as normal, just narrowing my peripheral vision, watching the floor as I walked and pretending not to see what I saw. I didn't agree with him. I felt vindicated. Here was someone who was experiencing the same things I was and who would be willing to acknowledge it with me. I had felt so alone in the last 3 months, haunted in my own home, harassed by spectres, both in dreams and while awake. I felt like I was being stalked, like every corner was hiding something frightening ready to jump out at me. Henry had become exasperated with my jumpiness, my flinching when he touched me. I didn't have any friends yet, probably because I moved into town at a time when mass disappearances were putting everyone on edge. Even my family had gone from concerned to simply bored with the strange situation that I could not explain over the phone. Then there it was, a tiny square in the personals column of some local newspaper we got through the door. A rag we never even read, just moved from the hallway to the recycling in the kitchen. For some reason yesterday I did pick it up, sat down on the stairs and began to flip through. Local events have all been cancelled due to the curfew. Missing persons posters litter the second half. Family members paying for that tiny chance someone hasn't already seen their daughter on the news and might have some new information. The last 3 pages were ads for free or very cheap items in your local area, a sofa someone wants rid of, a cat someone needs space from, alongside some wanted ads for free baby clothes or toys. On the very last page there was a small black outlined ad with a title that echoed in my mind for at least a minute after I read it. Do you feel watched? I shuffled closer to the wall and shot a quick glance over my shoulder to be sure it wasn't watching now. A shadow stepped back from the top of the stairs into the bathroom and I turned my body so my back was at the wall instead. This way I could read and see from the corner of my eye if it was watching again. You're not alone, call me. The number was local. The idea of calling someone to talk about this felt suddenly thrilling and terrifying. I couldn't do it in the house, but I had grown rather afraid of going out lately. Even outside the shadow lingered, and there was the added threat of, well, the town. Perhaps the garden would suffice. While I was thinking, Henry came out of the kitchen holding 2 steaming cups of tea. He looked at me on the stairs, clutching the grey pages of a strange newspaper, and walked into the living room without comment. In the beginning he had been sympathetic, said leaving my job and being distant from my social circle was getting to me. He suggested different herbal teas to stay calm and help me sleep and encouraged me to call my family every day to stay sane. He wanted me to stop talking about it, to stop staring past him towards the hall or looking back over my shoulder if I wasn't facing the door. At one point, when he was at his most frustrated with me, he said he wouldn't have dated me if he had known I was a nutjob. Later over tea he apologised, but I could tell from the conversation that he was making it very clear he didn't want to hear about the shadow again. It simply was not real, and I was only feeding it by continuing to believe. I told him about the ad because I tell him everything. I tell everyone everything. I'm not good at keeping things inside. Henry dismissed it off the bat and changed the subject, but when he took our cups back out to the kitchen to make more tea, he took the paper. I heard the recycling bag rustle and wondered at ways to retrieve it without him hearing the same sound. That night, maybe 2 a.m, when he had finally put down his work and gone to bed, I waited for him to start snoring, then crept down the stairs. I didn't feel afraid of the shadow because there are no shadows in the dark. I made sure not to turn on any lights and used the night vision I had slowly gained from sitting in darkness waiting for Henry to sleep. The kitchen in our small 1-bedroom house is not difficult to navigate without sight. The recycling bag lay limp on the tile beside the fridge, and in 2 strides I was holding its plastic ties. I loosened them and reached in, pulling out a handful of biscuit packets before finally feeling the dry paper. I swiveled on my bent legs and sat down on the cold tile, my back to the fridge door. Suddenly the light of my flashlight illuminated the paper and I flipped to the back to get the number. Now with the source of light in the room, I saw the shadows moving at the edge of the orb I had created around myself. I blocked them out and focused on tapping the number into our wireless phone and pressing the dial. The sound of ringing on the other end was loud. I held the phone to my ear and waited with held breath. The ringing stopped and an answer machine beep rang out. No message, no leave your name and number, just the beep. I waited a moment. I don't know what I expected, but I hadn't made a plan for such an event. I seemed to start speaking without deciding what to say, but somehow got out a coherent sentence in correct English. I saw your ad, my number is. I hung up and turned off the flashlight, just as the shadows seemed to be close enough to touch. I put the paper back in the recycling and climbed the stairs in the darkness, back up to our room. Henry was still snoring as I lifted the covers, then the phone ringing downstairs blasted out into the silent room and he started awake. I jumped back from the bed as he turned on the lamp and the shadows crept into the corners of the room. What are you doing?" He looked angry, eyes squinting in the dark. "Nothing, it's my mum." "Okay." He rolled over again and turned off the light. I tiptoed quickly down the stairs, this time not bothering with the flashlight, guided by the sound. "I didn't mean to call you so late. I thought you'd answer. I suppose that was presumptuous of me," I whispered quickly, without as much as a hello. "You saw my ad?" A male voice, older, local. I'm terrible at English geography. Could guide you around foreign cities better than I could English ones, but I could tell he was from Avis and not the south like I was. "And you know what it's about?" I don't know. I still felt as though Henry could hear me. I walked into the living room and opened the window. Sitting on the back of the couch, I leaned out and felt fresh air on my face for the first time in days. "What do you know?" I thought for a moment. I didn't really know anything. I was calling a stranger to talk about shadows I had seen in my home. What could possibly come from this? Since the curfew started, well, maybe a little while after, I started to notice something. I stopped and shook my head, looking around as if the answer I was looking for would appear like subtitles at the bottom of the screen. Something that shouldn't be there, he filled in the space for me, and I nodded. A silence followed, and I listened to him move around. Some pages moving, writing, and then a strange ticking like a metronome. "And what would you like me to do for you?" No one believes me. I don't even believe me. I've tried ignoring it. I've tried chasing it around my house. I can only see it for a moment before I look for it. "It's your eyelashes. You see them in your peripheral. You look and it's gone." "No." "Can you be sure?" "I can. I can feel it too, watching me. I can feel what it means to do." "And what is that?" "Watch. It wants to watch." "You feel it watching you, you know it wants to watch you. If all it wants to do is watch, then why are you afraid of it?" "I didn't say I was afraid of it." "But you are." "Why did you put an ad in the paper if you didn't want people to call you and tell you this?" "I did want you to call, and you're not the first, but you must understand that I was vague in my ad so as not to attract attention from the wrong people, and it is possible you could be on a different page to the one I'm on." "What page is that?" I asked. "The last one, or indeed the first one, perhaps the first of the last one." I looked around the darkness of my garden, up where stars are supposed to be but where light pollution presides. You've lost me. I'd like to meet you, tomorrow." "I'm not sure. This is strange. I don't know you at all." Suddenly the faces of those missing women flashed through my mind. What if they had made this same call? "Greenwood Park tomorrow at lunch." He hung up. When I arrived at the park, I knew where to go immediately. There were only a few people around, all walking briskly. No one looked relaxed or happy like they would usually be on a nice walk in the park. They looked anguished, like they had come out in a desperate attempt to feel normal and were now realizing that wasn't going to happen. In a brightly lit corner at the end of the park, a small wooden bench was occupied by a nondescript older man in a grey tweed suit. He was holding what from a distance looked like a camera, but as I got closer, I recognised as an antique I was mildly familiar with from film class at school, a phantasmagoria. This was my shadow man, and if it wasn't, it was a strange coincidence. "Sit down, the bench is large enough for the two of us." I sat at the very opposite end from him, and he shuffled a little further away. He looked straight ahead, not at me, and began to speak. "Well, young lady, I won't waste your time. Let's get right to it. You've been seeing shadows, so have I. Not just lumps of darkness from an absence of light, but shadow people, not just in your home, but here now, everywhere." "I have," I replied, looking down at my hands, my chipped nail varnish and rough skin. I wanted so badly to be understood, to be listened to, because I was so afraid, and it's much scarier to be scared of something that no one else can see. But sitting on this bench, listening to this man, I suddenly felt quite silly. "I noticed them too. I took too long to notice, and now it may be too late. Some others have contacted me with the same experience. Some make contact then disappear. My wife, she showed me the shadows, and I fear it's too late for her. My husband he thinks I'm seeing things because of stress or lack of sleep." "You are. You can only see them because you're tired. You're stressed and that makes you more alert. You're looking for danger because you have a heightened awareness now. So what do you think it is?" "I think it is one being, like how mushroom heads pop up over miles of land, but their root system is the same. I think they're limbs of the same creature, eyes of the same being. I think the shadow that watches me watches you too. I think they've come down from the mountains like the wildlife that came in search of people when we all went indoors. So, an animal." He tightened his grip around the phantasmagoria and shifted in place. He looked deep in thought, then turned to look at me. "Do you know what this is?" "I do. Not sure what use it would be out here. My wife and we bought it from an old odd ends and bits and pieces shop on Estrid Street. It replaced our TV. Doesn't it show the same thing over and over again? Suppose the TV does too. We collected hundreds of slides for it. Not all for this model. You slide one in, turn it on, turn the wheel, and off you go. He looked animated for a moment, as if a jolt of energy shot through him, then it faded away and he looked solemn, slowly sinking in his nostalgia like an animal in quicksand. I'm not sure what this has to do with this. Shadows, obviously. Well, yes, of course, both subjects involve shadows, I replied. I'd brought this upon myself. If he decided to cave my skull in with the clunky contraption and drag my body under the brush, that's what Henry would say. She brought it on herself. This man was clearly going through something, and in my attempt to plaster over my own cracks, I had fed into his delusion and made it worse. I scanned the park, tensing at the lack of people. Just a few lonely wanderers left. A couple sat on a bench a few yards away. They looked over at us and smiled, and I wondered, if this man kills me today, will they be on the news talking about how normal he looked? I think I should go home. My husband will come looking for me if I'm not home soon. I stood up from the bench and looked down at him. He looked smaller now and rather pathetic, clutching his antique. I hope you've seen the missing persons posters, he interrupted. I knew some of those people. They were customers at my shop or grew up with my kids. Everyone in this town is connected. I don't know you, but I probably know someone you know. We have a responsibility to each other. I'm not from Avis. I moved here with my husband when I lost my job. Then perhaps you stand a better chance of getting out. I looked around, suddenly exasperated, and threw my arms up. You could get in your car and drive out of town now. There's nothing stopping you. I'd like to think so too, but I haven't. You haven't either. It's hard to leave Avis. I turned and started to walk towards the gate. I hear him stand and follow after me. I look over my shoulder and see him looking over his, towards the darkness of the park, under trees, under the bench we just deserted. The shadows were reaching further out into the light, like the trees grabbing at Snow White. They're everywhere, he said as our eyes met, standing now. He seemed taller and stronger than he had, hugging his toy on the bench. There's a meeting. The others and I have agreed to meet in 2 days, but there's homework. You must capture a picture of one of the shadows. If you can get it on film, that's even better, but we're not fantasists. Bring a photograph of the shadow to this address in 2 days and be sure you're not followed. He pressed a small piece of paper into my palm and shuffled away much quicker than I would have thought him capable. I looked down at the address, then I dropped the paper to the ground and went home.